What if I told you that Native Americans built thriving cities inside cliff faces in one of the harshest winter environments in North America, where temperatures plunge below freezing for months, yet these communities survived and flourished for over 700 years without modern heating systems? Deep in the sandstone canyons of the American Southwest, in what is now Colorado, Utah, Arizona, and New Mexico, the ancestral Puebloans constructed architectural masterpieces that seem to defy logic. We're talking about multi-story stone apartment complexes built into sheer cliff faces at elevations exceeding 2,100 meters, where winter snowstorms can dump a meter of snow overnight and temperatures drop to minus 20 degrees Celsius. How did these communities not just survive, but thrive through winter after winter when a single design mistake could have frozen entire families to death? The answer reveals an understanding of thermal dynamics, solar geometry, and microclimate management that rivals modern passive solar architecture, achieved without thermometers, without written calculations, without any of the tools we consider essential for cold climate construction today. Picture yourself standing at the base of Mesa Verde in southwestern Colorado on a January morning when frost coats every surface and your breath turns to fog. Now look up at the cliff face towering 180 meters above you. Carved into the sandstone, tucked deep within a natural alcove approximately 27 meters deep and 18 meters high, sits Cliff Palace, the largest cliff dwelling in North America. This isn't a few scattered rooms. It's a complete city of 150 rooms and 23 kivas, circular ceremonial chambers, that once housed an estimated 100 to 120 people year-round. Notice something crucial about its placement. It's not built on the cliff face, it's built inside it, protected by a massive overhanging rock shelf that extends outward like a sheltering hand. This positioning is the first key to understanding how these communities survived winter. The ancestral Puebloans, who built these structures primarily between 1190 and 1300 CE, weren't randomly selecting cliff locations. They were choosing natural alcoves with precise characteristics that would determine survival. Dr. Larry Benson, a paleoclimatologist who has studied Mesa Verde for over 2 decades, explains that these alcoves create what engineers call a thermal buffer zone, a space where temperature extremes are dramatically reduced compared to the exposed landscape just meters away. When winter winds howl across the mesa top at 80 kilometers per hour, driving snow horizontally and stripping heat from any exposed surface, inside these alcoves the air remains relatively still, trapped by the geometry of the overhang. When outside temperatures drop to minus 15 Celsius, temperatures inside the alcove might only reach minus 5, a difference that means survival versus hypothermia. But the alcove selection was even more sophisticated than simple wind protection. If we examine the orientation of major cliff dwellings across the Southwest, a pattern emerges that reveals deep understanding of solar geometry. The vast majority of inhabited alcoves face south or southwest, and this isn't coincidence. During winter in the northern hemisphere, the sun traces a low arc across the southern sky. A south-facing alcove receives maximum solar exposure during the coldest months when warmth is most desperately needed. Dr. T.J. Ferguson, an ethnoarchaeologist who has worked extensively with contemporary Pueblo communities, points out that ancestral builders understood what modern architects call solar access angles. In summer, when the sun is high overhead, the deep overhang of the alcove blocks direct sunlight, keeping the dwellings cool. In winter, when the sun is low, its rays penetrate deep into the alcove, striking the back wall and the dwelling structures themselves. But here's where it gets truly ingenious. The ancestral Puebloans didn't just build randomly within these alcoves. They positioned their structures to maximize this winter sun exposure. At Cliff Palace, if you visit during winter solstice around noon, you can watch sunlight illuminate the plaza area and the front-facing walls of rooms, transforming cold stone into radiant heating panels. Measurements taken by architectural researchers show that south-facing walls at Mesa Verde can reach temperatures of 20 to 25 degrees Celsius on sunny winter days, even when air temperature is below freezing. This isn't accidental. It's applied physics, solar engineering without the equations. Now let's talk about the walls themselves, because this is where thermal mass principles come into play in ways that would impress modern sustainable architects. The ancestral Puebloans constructed their cliff-dwelling walls using two primary techniques: shaped sandstone blocks mortared together with adobe mud and coursed adobe bricks. Either way, the result was walls between 30 and 60 centimeters thick, far thicker than necessary for simple structural support. Why? These massive walls functioned as thermal batteries, storing heat energy during the day and releasing it slowly at night. Here's how it works. Stone and adobe have high thermal mass, meaning they absorb large amounts of heat energy before their temperature rises significantly. During a sunny winter day, those south-facing walls absorb solar radiation for 6 to 8 hours. The heat doesn't immediately pass through the thick wall. Instead, it takes hours to conduct through the mass. By the time the exterior heat begins radiating into the interior spaces, it's evening, exactly when warmth is most needed. Throughout the night, as outside temperatures plummet, the walls continue releasing stored heat, keeping interior temperatures relatively stable. Modern testing has shown that well-constructed thermal mass walls can moderate interior temperature swings by 8 to 12 degrees Celsius compared to exterior conditions. For the ancestral Puebloans, this meant the difference between waking to frozen water containers or merely cold ones, between frostbite risk or uncomfortable chill. Dr. Catherine Cameron, who conducted extensive research on Mesa Verde architecture, notes that rooms built against the back wall of alcoves, where stone absorbs the most direct sun, would have been the warmest and were likely reserved for elderly members of the community or young children most vulnerable to cold. But thermal mass only works if you can retain the heat it generates, which brings us to the crucial issue of insulation and air sealing. Look closely at the doorways of cliff dwellings, and you'll notice something unusual. They're tiny, often less than a meter high and 60 centimeters wide, forcing even average height people to crouch or crawl to enter. This wasn't about defense, though that was a secondary benefit. Small openings minimize heat loss. Every opening in a structure creates opportunities for warm interior air to escape and cold exterior air to enter, a process called infiltration that can account for 30 to 40% of heat loss in modern buildings. By making doorways as small as possible while still functional, the ancestral Puebloans dramatically reduced this heat drain. Many rooms also featured T-shaped doorways, wider at the top than the bottom, which served multiple purposes but thermally allowed warm air, which rises to remain trapped in upper portions of rooms. Archaeological evidence shows that many of these small doorways could be sealed with stone slabs or woven mats during the coldest nights, creating an additional insulation layer. Researchers have also found evidence of what appear to be door coverings made from hide or thick textile, materials that would have provided both privacy and thermal insulation. Inside rooms, plaster made from adobe mud was applied not just once, but repeatedly, creating layers sometimes 2 to 5 centimeters thick on interior walls. This plaster served multiple functions. It sealed tiny cracks that would allow drafts, created a smooth surface that reflected firelight and heat, and added another layer of insulation between the interior space and the cold stone. The spatial organization of cliff dwellings also reveals sophisticated thinking about heat management. Rooms weren't arranged randomly, but in clusters, often in multi-story configurations with shared walls. This clustering is thermally brilliant. When multiple families live in connected rooms sharing common walls, each family's heat contributes to warming their neighbors. The rooms in the center of clusters, surrounded on multiple sides by other occupied spaces, would have been significantly warmer than isolated edge rooms. Evidence suggests these central rooms were used as winter living quarters, while outer rooms might have served as storage or were used primarily in warmer months. The ancestral Puebloans also built their rooms relatively small, typically 3 to 4 meters by 3 to 4 meters with ceilings often less than 2 meters high. Small spaces require less energy to heat. A small fire in a 12 square meter room will raise temperature much more effectively than the same fire in a 30 square meter room. Furthermore, low ceilings keep warm air at human level rather than allowing it to rise uselessly toward high-vaulted spaces. Modern calculations estimate that heating a typical cliff-dwelling room to 15 degrees Celsius above outside temperature would require only about 2 to 3 kilograms of wood burned over a 12-hour period, an amount easily gathered and stored. Dr. Stephen Lexon, an archaeologist who has studied southwestern architecture for over 40 years, describes this room design as thermally optimized for minimal fuel input, noting that contemporary Pueblo peoples still prefer similar proportions for winter rooms. Let's talk about fire and smoke management, because this was perhaps the most delicate engineering challenge the cliff dwellers faced. Fire provides essential heat, but in an enclosed space, smoke can kill faster than cold can freeze. The ancestral Puebloans solved this through careful fire pit placement and ventilation design. In most rooms, the fire pit was positioned in the floor, often slightly offset from center. This below-floor level placement served multiple purposes. It protected the fire from drafts, concentrated heat low where people sat and slept, and created a natural convection pattern. Warm air and smoke rise, but in these rooms, fresh air would enter through the small doorway, flow across the floor toward the fire, get heated, and then rise toward the ceiling. Many rooms show evidence of smoke-blackened ceiling areas directly above where fire pits were located. And in these areas, researchers have found small openings, either through to the next floor above, through the roof, or toward the alcove exterior. These functioned as passive smoke vents, no moving parts, no active management, just geometry and physics ensuring that smoke exited while most heat remained. In the ceremonial kivas, which were larger spaces requiring more heating, the ventilation system was even more sophisticated. Kivas typically featured a ventilation shaft built into the wall, an upright stone slab called a deflector positioned between the ventilation opening and the fire pit, and a small hole in the floor called a sipapu. Air would enter through the ventilation shaft, be deflected by the stone slab to prevent it from directly extinguishing the fire, circulate around the subterranean chamber as it warmed, and smoke would exit through the roof opening that also served as the entry ladder hole. This created continuous air circulation without creating drafts that would make the space uncomfortable. Modern testing of kiva ventilation systems shows they can maintain breathable air quality even with a substantial fire burning for hours, while keeping interior temperatures 15 to 20 degrees warmer than outside. But even the best-designed shelter is useless if its occupants lack food and water during months when the landscape is frozen and inhospitable. The ancestral Puebloans addressed this through sophisticated resource storage and management strategies that made winter survival not just possible, but reliable. If you look at cliff-dwelling architecture carefully, you'll notice numerous small rooms, sometimes dozens of them, built high up in the alcove, often in positions difficult to access. These are granaries, specialized storage structures designed to keep harvested crops safe and dry through winter and beyond. The positioning high in the alcove, often in natural pockets and crevices in the rock, wasn't random. These locations were the driest parts of the alcove, protected from any moisture that might seep through the sandstone or blow in as snow. They were also difficult for rodents to access, preserving precious food stores from pests. Archaeological excavations of intact granaries have found preserved corn, beans, and squash, the three staple crops of the ancestral Puebloans, sometimes stored in carefully woven baskets or ceramic vessels. Analysis of these storage facilities suggests that a typical cliff-dwelling community would have stored enough food to feed the population for 12 to 18 months, well beyond a single winter. This wasn't subsistence living on the edge of starvation. This was food security, surplus management, and risk mitigation. Dr. Kristen Kuckelman, who has excavated numerous Mesa Verde sites, notes that granary storage capacity often exceeded annual consumption needs by 30 to 50%, suggesting the ancestral Puebloans planned for bad harvest years and maintained strategic reserves. Water management in winter presented unique challenges. Natural springs and seeps might freeze, snow was abundant, but required fuel to melt, and water storage vessels could crack if water inside them froze and expanded. Evidence suggests multiple strategies. Some cliff dwellings were built specifically near alcove locations, where seeps provided year-round water, as water flowing from inside the rock mass rarely froze even when surface temperatures were well below freezing. These seeps were often enhanced with constructed channels to direct water into collection basins or ceramic vessels. At sites without reliable seeps, the ancestral Puebloans maintained large ceramic jars for water storage, and the positioning of these jars inside rooms near fire pits ensured they wouldn't freeze solid. Snow could be collected and melted, but this was likely a supplementary source, as melting snow is energy-intensive. Analysis of carbon deposits in dwelling rooms suggests that fuel consumption didn't dramatically increase in winter, indicating that most water came from liquid sources rather than melted snow. Some researchers have also proposed that the ancestral Puebloans may have used a technique still practiced by some indigenous cold-climate peoples, creating ice storage. If you collect water during warmer periods and allow it to freeze in controlled conditions, you create a reserve that can be melted as needed, and ice itself provides insulation. While direct evidence for this practice is limited, the presence of what appear to be ice storage pits at some sites suggests it was at least occasionally practiced. Now we need to address the human factor, the social and cultural practices that made winter survival in cliff dwellings not just physically possible, but psychologically sustainable. Living in close quarters through long, dark, cold months can create stress, conflict, and cabin fever. Evidence suggests the ancestral Puebloans addressed this through structured social activities centered in the kivas. These ceremonial chambers weren't just religious spaces. They were community centers, especially crucial during winter when outdoor work was limited. The kiva provided a warm, lit space where people could gather, where children could play under supervision, while parents worked on indoor tasks like tool-making, basket weaving, or textile production. Kivas were where stories were told, where knowledge was transmitted from elders to youth, where the community maintained social cohesion during isolating months. Dr. Severin Fowles, an anthropologist who has studied Pueblo social structures, argues that the kiva was essential infrastructure for psychological winter survival, providing purpose, social contact, and cultural continuity during months when the natural world seemed hostile. The regular ceremonies held in kivas, many tied to the solar calendar marking winter solstice and the gradual return of longer days, provided hope and structure to the darkest months. This isn't just cultural practice. It's survival psychology, ensuring that people remained mentally healthy and communities remained cohesive through stress periods. Let's compare the ancestral Puebloan approach to winter survival with other indigenous cold climate architectures to appreciate the sophistication of cliff dwellings. In the Arctic and subarctic, peoples like the Inuit developed completely different solutions: semi-subterranean sod houses or snow igloos, structures that used insulation rather than thermal mass, and body heat rather than solar gain. These worked brilliantly in extreme cold, but required very different materials and environmental conditions. The ancestral Puebloans couldn't build with snow or sod effectively in their environment, but they had abundant stone and adobe and intense solar radiation even in winter. They engineered their solution to match their specific resources and conditions. Perhaps the closest parallel is the pit houses built by earlier southwestern peoples and by various tribes in the Great Basin and Plateau regions. These semi-subterranean structures used earth as insulation and thermal mass, achieving similar temperature moderation to cliff dwellings. But cliff dwellings had advantages: better drainage, protection from flooding, defensive positioning, and access to the massive thermal mass of the cliff itself. When researchers compare winter fuel consumption between reconstructed pit houses and cliff dwelling rooms of similar size, cliff dwellings typically require 20 to 30% less wood to maintain comparable interior temperatures, largely due to superior solar access and the thermal buffering provided by the alcove. But here's the question that haunts researchers. If these cliff dwellings were so successful, why were they abandoned? The ancestral Puebloans left Mesa Verde and most other cliff-dwelling sites between 1275 and 1300 CE, after only about 75 to 100 years of occupation. Current evidence points to a combination of factors, with climate change playing a major role. Tree ring analysis reveals a severe drought period from 1276 to 1299, the Great Drought as it's known in southwestern archaeology. This drought didn't just reduce crop yields, it fundamentally altered the landscape's carrying capacity. Springs that had flowed year-round began to fail. Forests that provided construction wood and fuel were stressed, making wood gathering more difficult. Game animals declined as their food sources withered. The cliff dwellings themselves couldn't fail in winter, but the agricultural and resource management systems that supported them could be overwhelmed by prolonged environmental stress. Additionally, some researchers suggest that the very clustering of population in cliff dwellings, which provided thermal efficiency and defensive advantages, may have created social tensions as resources became scarce. Concentrated populations require concentrated resources, and when those resources contract, conflict can emerge. Evidence of violence increases in the archaeological record during this period, suggesting that communities may have competed for dwindling water and farmland. The ancestral Puebloans didn't disappear. They migrated, primarily south and east, to areas along the Rio Grande and other river valleys where water was more reliable. Many modern Pueblo peoples, including the Hopi, Zuni, and the various Rio Grande Pueblos, are direct descendants of the cliff-dwelling communities, and they maintain cultural knowledge and oral histories that connect them to these ancient sites. What can modern architecture learn from ancestral Puebloan cliff dwellings? Quite a lot, actually. The principles they employed are exactly what contemporary sustainable architects call passive solar design, maximizing solar gain in winter through south-facing orientation and thermal mass, minimizing heat loss through insulation and air sealing, using building geometry to create natural ventilation, and clustering spaces to reduce overall energy needs. Modern earthship homes, straw bale houses, and other alternative construction methods often cite Southwestern indigenous architecture as inspiration. The difference is that the ancestral Puebloans achieved this without any of the analytical tools we consider essential. They couldn't calculate thermal conductivity values or model airflow patterns or measure R values. They built, observed what worked and what didn't, refined their designs over generations, and arrived at solutions that modern physics confirms as thermally optimal. That's empirical science at its finest, practical experimentation leading to sophisticated understanding. It's also a reminder that sustainable architecture isn't new, it's ancient. For most of human history, people built shelters that worked with natural energy flows because they had no alternative energy sources. We're the anomaly, the brief historical moment where cheap fossil fuels allowed us to brute force comfort through mechanical heating, regardless of building design. As we transition away from fossil fuels, we're rediscovering principles the ancestral Puebloans and countless other indigenous peoples mastered centuries ago. There's also something profound here about human adaptability and ingenuity. The ancestral Puebloans looked at an environment that seems obviously hostile to human habitation: cold winters with limited resources, no natural caves large enough for communities, no building materials except stone and mud. And they didn't just survive there. They created architectural masterpieces that modern tourists marvel at and engineers study for insights. They transformed cliffs from barriers into homes, from exposures into shelters. They read the sun's arc across the sky and positioned their homes to capture its warmth. They understood how stone absorbs and releases heat and built walls thick enough to moderate temperature swings. They observed how smoke rises and air flows and designed ventilation that kept fires burning and air breathable. None of this was luck. It was observation, experimentation, teaching, and refinement over generations. It was culture passing knowledge from elders to children, ensuring that each generation built on what the previous one learned. And it worked for centuries, housing thousands of people through countless winters, until environmental changes beyond their control forced migration to new lands where they rebuilt their lives and continued their cultural traditions. So what's your take on the cliff dwellings of the ancestral Puebloans? Do you think modern architects are doing enough to incorporate these passive solar and thermal mass principles into contemporary buildings? Have you visited Mesa Verde or other cliff-dwelling sites? And if so, what impressed you most about the architecture when you saw it in person? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. If you found this exploration of indigenous architectural engineering fascinating, you'll definitely want to check out our video on how the Inuit built ice houses that stayed above freezing inside, even when outside temperatures hit -40, another seemingly impossible feat of cold climate survival architecture. And if you're interested in how indigenous peoples developed sophisticated technical knowledge through observation and experimentation, hit that subscribe button because we explore these stories of human innovation regularly, showing that ancient peoples weren't primitive. They were brilliant problem solvers working with the resources and knowledge available to them. The past isn't simple or backward. It's full of solutions we're only now learning to appreciate again. Until next time, keep questioning assumptions about ancient peoples and what they could achieve. The answers are usually far more impressive than we give them credit for.